In the beginning there was only light, radiant, blinding, cruel. From the chariot of the sun, Helios gazed down upon the world, his golden eyes unblinking, his will absolute. Around him, the halls of the divine glittered with arrogance and endless applause. The gods of Olympus laughed loudly, feasted eternally, and loved carelessly. And among them, half buried in shadow and silence, was a girl no one truly saw. Her name was Circe. Born of light and sea, daughter of Helios, titan of the sun, and Perse, daughter of the ancient ocean, Circe was both fire and foam, both brilliance and depth. But to the gods she was neither enough of one nor the other. Her voice lacked the honeyed tone of the muses. It cracked and trembled like a mortal's. Her beauty, though delicate, was strange, less like a sculpted statue, more like wind-rippled water, always shifting, always alone. In the palace of the sun, she moved like a whisper. Among the other nymphs, her sisters and cousins, she was the plain one, the odd one, the quiet one. They danced with nymphs of rivers and mountains, entertained Hermes with their giggles, and tangled in affairs that would birth legends. But Circe lingered near the gardens, where rare herbs grew in the golden soil, whispering to roots and leaves as if they could answer. The divine world did not understand solitude. In Olympus, silence was weakness. Reflection was rebellion. To be different was to be dangerous. And Circe was very different. From her father, she inherited radiance, but not dominance. From her mother, she drew mystery, but not submission. Her powers bloomed slowly, unnaturally, like a flower opening at dusk instead of dawn. While other immortals could summon storms or shift tides with a glance, Circe's gift was intimate, soft, and strange. It came not from fury, but from focus, not from grandeur, but from longing. And so she was dismissed. The other gods called her dull. Her sisters mocked her voice, her hands stained with soil and sap. Her mother watched her with cool detachment, and Helios, lord of the sun, saw her not as his daughter, but as a flicker beneath his flame, a failing, a shadow. But Circe watched. She listened. She learned. She observed how the gods used power not as a balm, but as a blade, how they bent mortals to their will, claimed their love, punished their disobedience, and left behind temples of broken prayers. She saw how divine touch could bless or burn, and she wondered what it meant to create, not just conquer. What it meant to be seen, not worshipped.
There was a boy once, mortal, beautiful in the fragile way only mortals can be. He came to the island of her cousin, seeking prophecy. Circe spoke to him in secret, her voice barely above the wind. He said she smelled of rosemary and ash. He touched her wrist with trembling fingers and called her real. But when she offered him an herb to ease his fever, he recoiled. "Witch," he whispered, and though he kissed her that night under the moonlight, he left by dawn without looking back. It was her first lesson. Even those who claimed to see her would fear her in the end. And so Circe turned inward. She returned to her herbs. She listened to the wind. She whispered to flowers that bloomed only under starlight. She pressed her palms to the earth and asked it what secrets it kept. The gods laughed when she turned away from Olympus. Even Hermes, silver-tongued and ever-charming, teased her when he visited the gardens. "What are you brewing now, little sister?" he'd say. "A love spell or another potion to frighten some poor shepherd boy?" Circe smiled softly. She did not answer. Let them mock her. Let them misunderstand. In time, her powers began to deepen, rooted not in dominance, but in empathy. Her magic was of transformation, not destruction, of choice, not command. She could feel the soul inside a beast and coax it into changing its skin. She could hear the sorrow of a woman and find the plant that would numb it. She could take the chaos of the divine world and bend it gently into order. But the gods feared what they could not control. They called her dangerous now, not because of her silence, but because she had found strength within it. It began with a woman, scorned by a god seeking vengeance. Circe helped her, not with thunderbolts or curses, but with a whispered charm and a draught of crushed petals. The woman's heart mended, but her lover turned to ash in the waves. Circe was blamed. A second time, she tried to soothe the prince's fury. The herbs she offered steadied his mind, but also revealed his truths. He cast her out, claiming she had poisoned him with madness. A third time, a goddess came in secret, weeping. Circe gave her the name of a plant that would end her unwanted child. The goddess returned later with hollow eyes and never spoke to Circe again.
3 whispers, 3 acts of kindness, 3 betrayals. It was enough. The gods convened and passed judgment. She was unnatural, dangerous, a threat. Not because she had killed, but because she could. Because she had acted not with permission, but with will. Because she had chosen. And so they sent her away. Exile. Aiaia. A remote island fringed with wild roses and black cliffs where the sun never fully set and the stars lingered even in daylight. A place forgotten by maps, feared by sailors. A place where no one would come unless fate drove them there. Circe did not weep. When she arrived, she touched the earth with bare feet and breathed in the salt air. The island was quiet, wild, unshaped. It felt like her. Here she built a home of her own, stone by stone, hand by hand. No golden halls, no drunken feasts, just her and the herbs she grew with love and moonlight. The wolves came, the lions, the winds. They did not speak, but they stayed. They saw her. She was not their queen, but their kin. And in the silence, Circe began again. She did not seek revenge, she did not summon storms, she stirred her potions and watched the sea. And though the gods had cast her out, they had unknowingly given her a gift, solitude and the freedom to become. Not a goddess, not a nymph, not a villain. A woman, a witch, an enchantress, and in time sailors would whisper her name with awe and fear. Lovers would dream of her lips, her potions, her eyes that seemed to see the truth beneath flesh. But before all that, before Odysseus, before betrayal, before love, there was only this: a girl no one saw, a voice no one heard, a soul waiting to bloom in silence.
Circe was alone, but never without presence. Even in her solitude, the world pressed against her skin. Sunlight grazing her shoulders, ocean wind threading through her hair. The steady rhythm of waves like a heartbeat she had not yet claimed as her own. She had made her sanctuary of stone and flame, but the echo of others lived within her still. First, her father, Helios, Lord of the burning eye, Titan of day, who rode his chariot of fire across the sky with such indifference it felt like cruelty. He had never touched her cheek with tenderness. His love was a beam, distant, unwavering, blinding. To be the daughter of such brilliance was to live always in contrast. She had once tried to follow him, to win his gaze with devotion, with cleverness, with obedience. But Helios did not look down, he only illuminated. Circe had stopped chasing the sun when she realized it could never warm her. From her mother Perse she had inherited a cooler silence. The nymph daughter of Oceanus, Perse was as beautiful and changeable as the tide. Her voice was the sound of a seashell, a hum of secrets, but never answers. Perse birthed many children and loved none. She treated Circe with a cold regard, like one regards a blemish on glass, something unfortunate, but not worth breaking over. Circe grew up beneath these shadows, aching for connection like roots ache for water. Her sisters, Pasiphae and Persis, were storms of ambition and cruelty. They wore their beauty like blades. Pasiphae especially laughed at Circe's quiet ways. "Why do you whisper to weeds? No one listens." Her words were sharp, always wrapped in perfume and contempt. Perse was worse. He didn't speak. He simply looked at Circe as if she were a rusted coin, once minted by gods, now useless in the hands of power.
She envied them once, their ease in the world, their certainty. But envy curdled into indifference. She didn't want to be like them. She just wanted to be seen. But she was not. Not by the nymphs who surrounded her in Helios's court, silver-haired girls with honeyed voices and lilac laughter. They swam in the shallows of immortality, their joys surface deep. They giggled when Circe walked past, whispering of her human voice and sad eyes. They called her flower-blooded, herb-stained, strange. Circe tried once to laugh with them, to braid her hair like theirs, and to speak of lovers and nectar and the thrill of games played between gods and mortals. But her words came out slow, unsure, like a melody missing its rhythm. Their eyes slid past her, their attention, like dew, vanished with the heat of day.
She began to prefer the company of leaves. Then came Hermes, the god of travelers, of tricksters and tongues. He arrived like a breeze that smells of fruit before the tree is even ripe, unexpected, sweet, and faintly dangerous. He found her on Aeaea not long after her exile, his golden sandals gleaming as he stepped into her clearing. "Witch of the wild garden?" he purred, "still talking to weeds?" Circe looked up from her brewing. "Still talking to yourself." He grinned. "You've missed me." She hadn't. Not truly, but he brought conversation, and he stayed longer than most. He would flirt and flit, reclining on her stone bench, stealing figs from her bowl, and asking questions he never waited to hear the answers to. Yet he was kind in his own way. He never mocked her magic, only teased it. "You're dangerous," he said once, watching her coax a dying root to life. "You're dangerous because you care." And though Circe knew better than to trust him, knew his love was like sunlight on waves, warm but shallow, she sometimes wished he would linger, not for pleasure, not for gossip, but simply for presence, for the soft miracle of being heard. But even Hermes left. He always did. And so her days returned to their rhythm, tending herbs, listening to wind, speaking to creatures who answered in silence, until the ship came. It appeared one morning, black-sailed and wounded, dragging across the horizon like a shadow, unwilling to fade. Circe watched it from the cliffs. She felt the ripple in the air, the pull in her gut, like something ancient awakening. This was not the first vessel to find her shores. Others had come, sailors lost, pirates greedy, wanderers lusting for legend. Most met her lions, a few met her mercy. But this ship carried a man whose fate was tangled with her own, Odysseus. He stepped onto her island with salt in his hair and grief behind his eyes. Not a boy, not quite yet old. His body carried the weight of battles, of choices, of men lost and gods betrayed. He was not beautiful in the way immortals were, but Circe looked at him and felt the breath catch behind her ribs. There was something unfinished in him, a wound he wore like armor. She watched him from behind trees as he led his men toward her home. They laughed, loud and greedy, speaking of feasts and women and gold. Their hands were ready to take, their hunger wolfish. Circe knew this hunger. She had fed it before, sometimes with kindness, sometimes with poison. She invited them in, her voice soft, her movements fluid. She served them wine steeped in herbs, bread laced with charm. They didn't hear the tremor beneath her calm. They didn't see how her fingers trembled as they passed the cups. They didn't ask why she offered anything at all. And then they were pigs. Snouts, hooves, panic. All except one. Odysseus had stayed back, cautious, watching. He entered her hall last. She turned to him, ready. But he held no weapon, only his eyes, dark, searching, aware. She had transformed countless men before, but none had ever looked at her after and seen a woman, not a witch. He did. And in that gaze, Circe felt her breath falter, not from fear, from recognition. This, then, was her true danger. Not gods, not exile, not mockery, but this man who might see through her enchantments, not just the ones made of herbs and spells, but the ones made of pain and survival. She could turn him into anything. But what would she become in his presence? She let him live. For the first time in memory, she chose to let someone close, not because she needed them, but because a part of her, a part long hidden, hoped to be seen, to be known. Odysseus stayed. Not long, not forever, but long enough to make her wonder if she was still capable of softness, of desire that did not end in fear. And that, perhaps, was the most dangerous magic of all. Exile is a kind of silence. When Circe was cast from the halls of the divine, she expected rage to accompany her. She thought the banishment would feel like a blade, sharp, brutal, final. But it arrived more like mist, slow, cold, inevitable. Aiaia awaited her, not as punishment, but as mirror. The island breathed with forgotten magic, untamed, lonely. Wild things flourished there, thick-barked trees, pale roses that bloomed at dusk, thorns that whispered under moonlight. It was land not made for temples or gods. It bowed only to itself. Circe stepped into its soil and was not repelled. It opened to her. She built her sanctuary with her own hands, walls of stone, roof of reeds, hearth always warm. Not a palace, a refuge. Her magic deepened in that solitude, growing not like fire, but like roots. She learned to speak the language of plants. She whispered to vines until they curled at her touch. She harvested herbs at dawn, when their spirits were half asleep and gentle. Her garden grew full of things no other hands could tame. She began to craft. Not curses, remedies, not death, but change. She distilled memories into liquid, ground grief into powder, stirred longing into flame. Her potions were not tools of wrath, they were extensions of her soul. stirred with fingers that remembered what it meant to be feared. Yet fear found her. Men came. The first were pirates, loud with hunger, their eyes full of heat, their hands careless. They saw her small home and her alone body and smiled. One reached for her hair before she'd even spoken. She turned them into beasts, not with rage, but necessity. A lion licked its paw where a man once stood. A boar rooted through her wine jug, confused. They had not wanted her, they had wanted the taking. She left the beasts on the island, let them roam. She did not kill them, she did not speak to them. She simply stopped seeing them as men. More came, more hunger, more eyes, more of that raw male certainty that the world owed them, her skin, her smile, her surrender. She fed them figs and honeyed wine, and their snarls would echo into the trees. Over time, they became part of the landscape. Circe grew practiced, efficient. Her seductions were traps. Her hearth was a test. Men did not come for her. They came for what they believed she would not deny. And so her magic learned to say no with elegance. But one morning, the wind changed. It carried a scent unlike the others. Cedar smoke, sea salt, something bruised and yearning. She climbed the cliff and saw the black sail, a ship wounded and slow, carving a crooked line toward her shore. She did not go down to greet it. Instead, she waited in her courtyard, grinding valerian into dust, letting the tension wrap itself around her spine like a vine. Her lions lay beside her, restless. The air held a charge. The plants turned their faces to the sea, expectant. Footsteps came, multiple, loud, crude. She knew this rhythm, the clump of assumption, the clatter of men who believed they were gods because they had survived other storms. But behind them, something else, a stillness, a weight. She felt it before she saw him, Odysseus. When his men entered her home, they feasted. Their mouths were slick with need, their eyes undressing her as if she were fruit waiting to be bitten. She smiled. She poured the wine. Her voice was soft and melodic, her fingers brushing the rim of each goblet with just enough tenderness to distract. She cast her spell, and again they changed. The room filled with grunts and shrieks, panic and claws. The transformation took seconds, but its truth rang ancient. Men who came to consume were no different than the beasts they feared becoming.
But Odysseus stood in the doorway. He had not drunk. He had not entered. He had watched. Circe turned toward him slowly. Their eyes met. No demand, no fear, only study, appraisal. Something alive passed between them, an understanding so intimate it felt invasive. He said,
"You are the witch." She answered, "You are the cautious one." He stepped forward, hand on his blade, but not yet unsheathed. "What have you done to them?" She replied, "What they chose. They raised their hands to me before I raised mine." He did not deny it. He simply asked, "Will you do the same to me?" And she hesitated. She could have cast the spell in a breath, one word, one flick of her wrist, but instead her fingers remained at her sides, her lips parted with something that wasn't a curse. "No," she whispered, and in that moment the tension shifted. She invited him to sit. He did. They talked, words curled between them like smoke, wary at first, then warmer. He told her of war, of men lost to sea and pride. He did not boast. He spoke plainly. She listened with stillness she had mastered over years of solitude. In his voice she heard weariness. In his silences she heard truth. He was not like the others. She brought him food. He did not devour. He tasted. He watched her move with the reverence of someone who had seen too much beauty die. She poured him wine. He drank. Nothing changed.
"I am not afraid of you," he said. "I am not trying to frighten you." He set the goblet down. "Then what are you trying to do?" She didn't know how to answer. Her body remembered the shape of caution, but her heart leaned toward him like a flower toward sun. He looked at her not with hunger, but curiosity. Not as prey, not as a prize. He looked into her. The heat between them was not sudden. It was a slow burn, like coals buried beneath ash, waiting for breath. His glances grew longer. Her hand brushed his once as she passed him a bowl, and something trembled in the air. But Circe had known desire before. It had always ended in shame or violence. This felt different. With Odysseus, her skin did not tighten with warning. Her body did not shrink. She expanded. She wanted to know how his fingers would feel tangled in her hair, not as possession, but as worship. Desire was not the threat. Hope was. That night, she did not cast him out. He followed her into the garden, beneath the pale moon, where the vines hung low and the jasmine released its fragrance like a secret. They said little. They did not need to. He reached for her, and she let herself be reached. Not taken, not claimed, chosen. Night fell gently over Aiaia, wrapping the island in a hush that felt holy. The sea softened its rhythm, and even the leaves seemed to quiet themselves, as if the world itself knew something sacred was about to pass between two souls too scarred to trust it. Circe stood in her garden, moonlight on her shoulders, her hair falling loose like a curtain of night. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with awareness. Her pulse stirred like a tide under her skin.
She had invited Odysseus, not with words, but with stillness, with silence, with the way her body turned slightly toward him and did not flinch. He came. He stepped into the garden, his presence heavy with hesitance, not lust. He did not reach for her as men had before. He did not press, did not assume. He watched her, waited. Circe exhaled, and in that exhale, something ancient softened inside her. She moved first, not boldly, but slowly, like mist creeping across warm ground. She took his hand, calloused and steady. She brought it to her chest, placed it flat over her heart. "Do you feel it?" she whispered. His fingers stilled. "What?" "That I'm real," she said. "Not spell, not shadow, just real." He looked down at her, and something in his eyes broke open. Yes. She drew him inside, through the threshold of her sanctuary, not as captor, not as queen, but as a woman letting down her armor for the first time in what felt like centuries. The hearth flickered, casting gold across stone and skin. The air was scented with crushed herbs and salt, with oil warmed by fire, with the unspoken ache that had bloomed slowly between them. When he touched her, he did not conquer. He asked. Each caress was a question, each kiss a breathless answer. Circe, who had turned countless men into beasts, who had protected herself with thorns and illusion, found herself stripped bare, not of clothing, but of certainty. She had known the body's wants, but this was something else. His lips trailed down her collarbone, slow as prayer. His hands traced the curve of her waist as if learning a new language. He did not worship her as a goddess. He held her as if she were breakable, and that made her feel stronger than any divinity. She arched beneath him, gasping when their skin met fully. Her nails raked his back, not to mark him, but to anchor herself, to remind her body that this was not dream, not illusion, but flesh and heat and need. The world dissolved. There was only touch, only breath, only the rhythm of two bodies finally allowed to want without punishment. Their night unfolded like a spell, slow, deep, deliberate. He pressed kisses along the inside of her thighs, soft as rain. She tangled her fingers in his hair and whispered his name like a secret. When he entered her, it was not with triumph, it was with surrender. And Circe, who had always held the power, let go of it. In that moment, she gave herself not as a prize, not as myth, but as woman, longing, uncertain, alive. Their bodies moved in harmony, not conquest. Her hips lifted to meet his, her breath caught on a moan she hadn't meant to release. His eyes never left hers. Even in pleasure, even in the thick of it, he watched her, as if afraid she might vanish. She felt herself unravel. She held nothing back. And when it was done, when sweat cooled on their skin and the hearth glowed low, they lay tangled together, heart against heart, breath sinking into something slower, deeper.
Circe had never felt so exposed. Odysseus rested his forehead against hers. "You are nothing like they said." Her throat tightened. "What do they say?" "That you're dangerous," he murmured. "That you enchant men. That you trap them in illusions and leave them broken." She laughed, soft and bitter. "I gave them the freedom to show me what they were. If they broke, it was never by my hand."
He pulled her closer. "Then why did you let me stay?" She hesitated. "Because you saw me," she whispered, "and I didn't want to disappear." A silence fell between them, heavy with everything neither of them had dared admit before. He stroked her hair, his fingers lingering on her temple, her cheekbone, her lips, as if memorizing her. Circe closed her eyes, and for the first time in centuries, allowed herself to dream. She dreamed of mornings shared with no fear of betrayal, of arms that stayed through storms, of a voice that called her name, not in hunger, but in devotion. She dreamed of a world where love did not cost power, where touch did not require defense. But even in the warmth of his embrace, a part of her remained distant, not cold, just cautious, because desire could lie, and men, even tender ones, eventually sailed away. Still that night she did not resist the sweetness of what bloomed between them. She let herself soften, petal by petal. She whispered stories into his shoulder, and he listened as if every word were a spell meant for him alone. They made love again, slower this time, less hunger, more reverence. And when sleep finally pulled them under, she dreamt not of punishment, but of peace. The stars turned above her island. The lions dozed. The sea breathed against the shore. And Circe, held by a man who had not demanded her surrender, found something more dangerous than power: hope. It curled in her chest like a new flame, but she did not yet know if it would warm her or burn her whole.
Dawn always comes, even after the sweetest night. Circe woke alone in her bed, the scent of him lingering in the folds of the linen, in the crook of her neck. For a moment, the silence felt soft, like a lull after passion, but as the morning widened and the light grew bolder, that silence sharpened. Odysseus was gone. Not forever, not yet. She found him by the shore, hands clasped behind his back, gazing out at the waves with the look of a man listening for something only he could hear. "You're leaving," she said. He turned slowly, and there was sorrow in his eyes. "I have to. My men, my wife, Ithaca." The words struck like stones, each one carving out a piece of the warmth she had kept safe. "Ithaca," she repeated, and the name tasted of earth she would never touch. Circe did not beg, she did not ask him to stay. Her pride had long been taught by absence, but she walked toward him, barefoot, steady. "Will you come back?" He hesitated, too long. "I want to," he said, "but the world pulls me." She nodded. It was not an answer, but it was the truth.
She placed her hand over his heart one last time and let herself feel it, his warmth, his weight, the reality of him. Then she stepped back. He kissed her, not hungrily, not to claim, but with reverence, with gratitude. Then he boarded the ship, and the sails caught wind, and the sea took him. Circe did not cry. Instead, she stood on the black cliffs, watching until his ship was a shadow, then a smudge, then nothing. The sky was pale, the wind was cool, the world, as always, continued. She turned and walked home. The emptiness came quietly, like fog. Her bed felt too large, the hearth too quiet, the garden overgrown. She moved through her home like a ghost, not undone, but changed. She still brewed, still whispered to leaves, still ran her fingers through the mane of the lion who had once been a man. But something within her had loosened. The threads of solitude, once tight around her soul, had frayed.
Weeks passed. Then one morning, her stomach turned at the scent of rosemary. She bent over the earth and vomited, and the island seemed to tilt. She knew. Life had taken root inside her. Not by accident, not by mistake. A consequence of love, yes, but not punishment. A gift, a reckoning. Her fingers touched her belly, trembling, not with fear, with awe. She would bear a child, alone. No one told her how to do it. There were no divine midwives, no nymph sisters to cradle her, just the wild of Aiaia and her own body learning its sacred purpose. She brewed teas to soothe the sickness. She listened to the rhythm of her blood. And as her belly grew, so did something else, something deeper than any spell she had ever cast. Resolution. She spoke to the child through her skin, told him stories of stars, of herbs, of animals that had once been men. She did not speak of his father often. When she did, her voice was tender but quiet. She did not curse him, nor did she paint him in gold. She spoke the truth. He loved me for a while, and then he left. She named him Telegonus, which means born far away. He came screaming into the world, in the heart of night, when the moon was high and the wind still. Her hands caught him, her arms cradled him, her mouth kissed the top of his head before he had even drawn breath. And just like that, she was no longer alone. Motherhood was a new kind of magic. It did not roar, it pulsed. Each moment with him was sacred. The way he gripped her finger, the way his cries quieted against her skin, the way his eyes, so different from hers, seemed to hold entire oceans of possibility. She taught him not only to speak and walk, but to listen, to the trees, to the silence, to the ache in others. He learned the language of herbs and stars. He knew not to pluck a plant without thanking it. He knew his mother's voice before he knew the sound of thunder. And Circe, she changed. The pain of abandonment
did not vanish, but it transformed. It stopped defining her. Odysseus had taken something from her, but he had also left behind something greater. She no longer waited for anyone. She no longer wove spells to defend herself from longing. She no longer mistook desire for destiny. Instead, she created new potions, new boundaries, new truths. She carved her magic into scrolls so it would not die with her. She healed animals too wounded to walk. She sheltered lost travelers when they came in peace. And when they came with greed, her lions reminded them what the island was. Ayaya was hers, not because the gods had given it, but because she had claimed it, not through dominion, but devotion. Her magic deepened in quiet ways. She learned to speak to the sea itself, not to control it, but to understand it. She bathed beneath moonlight without shame. She walked through her forest with her son on her back, whispering the names of every tree. Once, she had feared being forgotten. Now, she welcomed it. Not because she no longer wished to be seen, but because she had finally seen herself. There were nights when she still missed him. The curve of his shoulder in sleep, the way he had touched her like she was not dangerous but sacred. But she did not wish him back. Some loves are meant only to open doors, not to stay within them. And in his absence, Circe walked through. Telegonus grew into a boy full of questions, of curiosity, of strength. He did not fear her power. He called her mother and meant it as reverence, not because she ruled him, but because she raised him in love and in truth. One day she knew he would leave too. All children must. But she would not break. Because pain had taught her something no spell ever could. She was not made to be chosen. She was made to choose. And she had chosen herself. There is a silence that arrives not with absence, but with fullness. Circe stood at the edge of her island, where sea met stone, and the sky opened like a hymn. The air was cool against her skin, salt-heavy and old, and within her there was no ache, only stillness, a quiet unlike any she had ever known. Not the silence of exile, nor the silence of loss. This one was earned, woven, chosen. She thought of all she had been. Daughter of Helios, born with golden blood that burned too bright for her mother's touch. Mocked nymph with too soft a voice and too strange a stare. Exile, witch, temptress, monster. And now? Now she was simply Circe. No one had named her that. Not the gods, not her lovers, not even her child. She had grown into it herself, like a tree twisting toward the sun without asking permission to bloom. She had loved, fiercely, deeply, without reserve, and she had been left, like all things too wild or too real. But the leaving did not hollow her. It refined her. Once she had confused being desired with being seen. Now she knew better. Now she understood. The truest kind of seeing begins within. Love, she had learned, is not always the binding force. Sometimes it is the breaking, the tearing open, the mirror that forces you to face your own shape and what you'll do to preserve it. Odysseus had done that. In touching her, in opening her, he had not saved her, he had cracked her shell. And through that wound, she had found herself alone, alive, becoming.
Motherhood had not softened her, it had deepened her. Her magic had not corrupted her, it had revealed her. Solitude had not destroyed her, it had made her sacred. And through it all, she had become fluent in the language of silence. She knew the sigh of old wood as it shifted in her cottage, the way the wind curled when storms approached, the subtle flicker of light that meant her herbs were ready to bloom. Even her own heartbeat, once loud and disparate, now pulsed like tide, steady, certain, her own. The gods no longer visited. Let them keep their thrones. Let them gaze into the pools of prophecy and dream of war and lust and legacy. She had her island. She had her son, growing tall and curious and distant with each season, as all sons must. She had her magic. She had herself. What else was there? She had stopped asking what she was meant to be. That had been the language of the gods: fate, duty, punishment. Now she asked only, "What do I choose?" That was her freedom. Not power over others, but power over her own becoming. She chose to rise with the dawn and grind herbs with her bare hands. She chose to dance beneath the moon, her body bare, her laughter rising like mist from the sea. She chose to teach her son to honor life and fear nothing but the loss of truth. She chose to let herself be wild. Not wild like fire or rage, but wild like roots that break stone, like wind that wears down mountains, like a woman who answers only to herself. Circe no longer sought to be remembered. She did not yearn for her name to be carved in myth, her deeds sung by mortals.
She would vanish in time, as all do, but before that day came, she would live fully. And if a whisper of her remained in the world, a wind in the leaves, a shimmer on the waves, then let it say this: that she once loved with every thread of her being, that she suffered and still stood, that she learned her name not from the mouths of men, but from the silence she walked through alone, and that in the end she was not waiting for redemption. She was the redemption. She did not forget. That would be too easy. She remembered everything. The ache of being cast aside by her father, the bitter sting of the nymph's laughter, the first man who screamed as he turned into a beast, the feel of Odysseus's breath on her throat,
the weight of her son's head on her chest the first time he slept in her arms. Memory was her altar. She lit no fires for gods. She burned them for herself. When storms came, she welcomed them barefoot, arms wide. When calm returned, she sang softly to the sea. She did not demand that the world be kind, only that it be real, that it meet her without pretense. And it did.
Her island bloomed for her. The trees whispered her name. The lions watched her with devotion. Even the moon seemed to pause in the sky a little longer when she walked beneath it. Circe was not divine. She was not mortal. She was herself. And that was more than either. In the stories mortals would one day tell, they would speak of her magic, her potions, her island, her lovers. Some would make her a villain, others a goddess. Few would understand her. But perhaps one, a woman standing at the edge of her own solitude, might hear the echo beneath it all. The murmur not of a myth, but of a woman who had finally learned to belong only to herself. That would be enough. As the sun dipped low, casting gold across the sea, Circe turned from the cliffs. Her hair was long and wild, streaked with silver. Her steps were slow, grounded, sure. And behind her, the waves whispered, over and over, her name. Not as a curse, not as a legend, but as a love song. To the woman who had never waited for someone to name her power. To the woman who had become it.